came into this century with 5 acknowledged nuclear armed states and 2 declared, acknowledged, but not covered by the treaty, India and Pakistan, and 1 undeclared, Israel, which is believed to hold a large nuclear stockpile, in fact now larger than the United Kingdom's, although that's never actually been declared by Israel. So the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty has in fact been very effective in stopping the spread of nuclear weapons to states that don't have them. It's been less effective in getting those who do have them to abide by their side of the deal and actually reducing their arsenals and proceeding to a point of nuclear disarmament. But in 1992, we did get some reasonable progress in that all the nuclear-armed states agreed to stop nuclear testing. And that continued for 3 years, and partly as a result of that, the non-nuclear weapon states agreed to indefinitely extend the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. Prior to that, it had had to be renewed on a regular basis. So those of us who didn't have nuclear weapons gave them up forever, on the basis that those who did have them would reduce their holdings and would not test. Within a month of that deal being reached, the Chinese had conducted their first nuclear test, and the French had announced that they were about to resume nuclear testing in the South Pacific, underground testing. We were outraged by it, as were most non-nuclear weapon states, and so our government decided to go back to the International Court of Justice and again seek a ruling from the International Court that France should cease nuclear testing in our region because it was contrary to international law. We had a few problems in doing this because although when we brought the first case, France had accepted the compulsory jurisdiction of the court, after our success in that case, it had removed itself from the compulsory jurisdiction of the court. So what we had to try and do, in effect, was to reopen a case that dealt with atmospheric testing in respect of underground testing. So we faced a quite significant hurdle in that respect. And frankly, our advice to our government was that we would not be successful on legal grounds. We also faced some quite significant environmental obstacles because although there'd been, as I say, 140 odd tests conducted in our region underground, and although there was evidence of impacts from this testing on the atolls that they'd taken place on, there are signs of fissures and cracks developing in the atolls, and clearly there was going to be leakage from these atomic stockpiles from the testing over the coming years. There was no real evidence that that was actually going to have an impact as far as New Zealand was concerned, and certainly as far as the other small islands in the region was concerned. So we did face some quite major obstacles, but the government said that we should do it anyway because they felt so strongly about this, what was regarded as a breach of faith by France in resuming testing. So we went to the court. What we succeeded in doing, and I won't go into the fine detail of this, what we succeeded in doing was getting a huge amount of focus, international focus, on French testing in the region as a result of this case. The international media coverage was absolutely immense, and I found that even in the hotel that I was staying at in The Hague, people who worked in the hotel would come up to me and they'd say, are you involved in this case against France, against nuclear testing? Because we think it's a very, very good thing that you do. And I think that this was the overriding sentiment that there was around the world. What we found was that at the end of the day, although the court had said that we were correct in going back to it, that in fact, as their earlier judgment had related to atmospheric testing, that it was not possible for us to go back and reopen the case substantively, but they made some very, very supportive comments in terms of nuclear testing, or against nuclear testing generally. What I think that case did, as well as the earlier case, the first case in the International Court, and the Rainbow Warrior arbitration, was bring international attention to what was happening. It aroused a great deal of, as I say, public sentiment about it, and it also raised a huge amount of embarrassment and outrage in France. The French public had not been terribly much aware of what was going on until these cases were brought, and so each of them progressively undermined the rationale for French testing and the government's support for an activity that was actually associated with them. So I think that it was a very good example of the way in which international law actually worked to prevent proliferation. Well, what about the situation now? Are we still in a situation where we face nuclear proliferation? And if so, what can international law do about that? Regrettably, I think the answer to the first question is we are in a situation where there is increasing proliferation. Now, on one level, the bilateral level between the United States and the former Soviet Union, there has certainly been a reduction in the strategic stockpiles of both countries, and indeed in the tactical stockpiles of both countries. But what we've found is that with the end of the Cold War, there has increasingly, and particularly over the last couple of years, been a movement by the United States away from multilateral solutions across a whole range of areas. Now, it's not unnatural in many ways that with the huge amount of power that the United States holds in the world, that it will increasingly look to itself to look after its own interests. And I think that you see this across a range of areas, from the International Criminal Court, which is a body that has been established by most of the states of the world to try and deal with genocide and massive crimes against humanity, to areas such as nuclear testing, where the current US administration has said that it will not abide by, not become party to the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty, which had been negotiated over many years, to a whole range of international human rights instruments where the United States has also said that it will not become party to these multilateral instruments. Now, one of the problems when you start talking about multilateralism and international law is that because the US is such a major player in this area, and because the current US administration has such a strong anathema to multilateral, to international action in so many of these areas, that these things can start sounding like a concerted attack on the United States. And I certainly don't mean that for a moment. But the fact of the matter is that it's very difficult to get anything done internationally without the United States, because you're such a major player on the international scene. If you look at an area like climate change, you generate a quarter of the world's climate-affecting gases. So if you stand aside from a treaty designed to deal with climate change, we're not going to get a meaningful treaty on climate change. And in that situation too, what happens is that the major generators from the developing world, such as China, such as India, such as Brazil, say, well, you know, if the West, which has benefited from the generation of these gases through its economic development, if it's not prepared to pay a price, then why should we developing countries pay a price? We need to have the opportunity to develop as well, and therefore we should not be impeded in what we do if countries like the United States are not going to accept any restriction on what they do. In the nuclear area, if you don't have the United States party to a treaty on banning the testing of nuclear weapons, then